Hello and welcome to the cEDH Brothers Brews. This is Brandon, otherwise known as Bevins. Today I'm joined by Tim. How you doing, Tim?
Doing good.
Alrighty. Thank you all for joining. Today we're going to go over a budget deck, which is going to be part of a new series, $100 budgets. If you like what you see, please leave a like, leave comments below if you have any questions, concerns, or suggestions. And let's get right on to it. All right, so today we're going to go over Mizzix of the Izmagnus. What she says is she's a goblin wizard, two and a blue and a red that says a 2/2 that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost greater than the number of experience counters you have, you get an experience counter. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost one generic less to cast for each experience counter you have. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to abuse her ability to lower the cost of our spells. And the way we do it is we're going to go into the combo. Our main combo piece is Firemind's Foresight. That's typically what you want to tutor for and what you want to get to as quick as possible. Um, and whenever you cast it, you want to get at least your fourth experience counter. That's going to cost 4 mana, 2 generic, a blue, and a red. And then you're going to search three spells of mana value 1, 2, and 3. The mana value 1 spells you want to get are Shock or Searing Touch. And then the mana value 2, you want to get Pyretic Ritual or Desperate Ritual. And then mana value 3, you want to get Reiterate. What you want to do is then cast your Desperate Ritual or Pyretic Ritual for 1 red to get 3 red on the stack. Well, while it's on the stack, then you want to cast Reiterate for 2 red. So total, that's what, 7 mana available. So it's a little mana intensive, but there's ways to get around that I'll talk about later. And you want to cast it with, of course, the fourth experience counter from Firemind's Foresight for a free buyback. And you just keep doing that to get a bunch of red. And you have Reiterate in hand. After that, you cast either Searing Touch or Shock, and use Reiterate to copy it on the stack to kill your opponents. So just to sum all of that up, in order to start and execute the infinite combo, you need 4 red, 1 blue, and 2 colorless, or 2 generic. And that would get you the win.
Okay.
Moving on to combo 2, we have Brain Freeze, Stormcone Artist, and Underworld Breach. So how this works is you cast Underworld Breach first for 2. Of course, Stormcone Artist has to already be on field.
Mm-hmm.
And then you cast Brain Freeze, milling yourself, getting for each copy you get of Brain Freeze, you also get treasure tokens from Stormkill Artist, so it pays for itself and some. And eventually, you want to either mill yourself out and then mill your opponents, or get pretty close to milling yourself out and milling your opponents.
Okay.
I personally don't use this one that much, but it's won me plenty of games, so I keep it in.
Well, and you can also use it to set up the Firemind Foresight combo too. So one of the things you
Yeah,
can
that's
do
true.
that is you can actually just do the brain freeze part, make a bunch of treasures off the copies. Now all your rituals and your searing touch and your iterates are all in your yard, and then just start firing off that way too.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's
I
like a way to
typically
snowball.
don't do that, but personally, just because I like milling people out sometimes, like I'm in the mood for it. But yes, you could definitely do that too, and that's also a great way to, if you can't like assemble the pieces on your own, but you
Mm-hmm.
have that available, just throw it out, and there
Yeah.
you go. That's a W.
Okay. Cool.
Another combo. So this one isn't a game-winning combo. This is more of a way to get you infinite mana. So this is Dualcaster Mage or Narumeha and Ghostly Flicker. So what you do is you cast Ghostly Flicker targeting, I don't know, 2 lands. And then you either cast Dualcaster Mage or Narumeha to copy it, targeting, and then the copy is going to target either your Dualcaster or Naru and a land. And you can keep doing that to infinitely loop bouncing your land, which comes in untapped, which you tap for mana, and you generate 1 mana each time.
Okay.
So what that could do is if you're strapped on mana a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and you want to either do something big like start your main combo, or you want to start storming off and like drawing a bunch of cards, that's one way that lets you do it.
Okay. Cool. Right on, man. A- Any other
Go
combos
ahead.
to go over?
No, that's it for now.
Okay. So now just to kind of talk about Mizzix in general, like what are some of his strengths and weaknesses?
Um, some of her strengths is the fact that she could have extremely explosive turns. Um, there are times where I think, I won't win, and then suddenly I cast something that draws me 2 cards, and suddenly the win is right there in my hand. Um, it's definitely easy to learn, but hard to master. Because that's with most combo decks in my opinion. But it just gets to a point where you're like, okay, I need this piece, and this piece, and then I can win.
Right.
Um, but where the skill ceiling kind of comes in is
Mm-hmm.
when you learn how to navigate around interaction, and you can use interaction yourself
Right.
um, to enable you to win, which is
Okay.
honestly one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, like I mean, any is it Storm deck will kind of you basically kind of control the board till you're able to assemble your combo win.
hmm
So
So let's go ahead and start talking about creatures. We've already talked about 3 of them, so this will be quick. The reason I included Archaeomancer is because of its ETB effect. You get your spell back. So if somebody counters your Firemind's Foresight, or if somebody counters another piece of your spell, you can always try and get it back, either the next turn or the same turn. Moving on to sorceries, we have Bond of Insight. This one is kind of a secret tech because it allows you to essentially stack your grave, and you can get your sorceries and instants from it. So it's kind of like an Archaeomancer, but a little bit better, in my opinion.
oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Merchant Scroll, of course, generic searcher. Well, searcher for blue instant specifically, which again for your Firemind's Foresight.
Mm-hmm. Very important.
Yes. I typically use it for Firemind's Foresight. Sometimes I get Ghostly Flicker with it if I want, but 99% of the time, Firemind's Foresight is what I'm aiming
Okay.
for. Moving on to Past in Flames, each instant of sorcery in your graveyard gets flashback. So again, it's another way to cast your Firemind's Foresight or your combo pieces. Solve the equation, a better Merchant Scroll for one more. You
Yep.
can search for any instant or sorcery, so you can search for any combo piece you might want. That's of course an instant or sorcery.
But most of the
Uh,
combos are instant or sorcery.
yeah, unless you're trying to get your Stormkiln Artist, but that's a creature, so you can't. Moving on to instants, Abrade. It deals 3 damage or destroys an artifact. Typically, destroying an artifact at instant speed is what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
I use it mainly as a source of crowd control for the board. Anticipate. You look at the top 3, draw 1 essentially. Chaos Warp, another piece of removal. I I love and hate this card because my luck has always been I remove something scary and something scarier enters because of it. Um, but it's another good piece of removal because you can pretty much target anything that is giving your opponents a lot of advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And 99% of the time, it's not going to be as whatever they get from it is not going to be as scary as you remove.
Right. Yeah.
Desperate Ritual, we've already talked about that. Dig Through Time, I've utilized Dig Through Time way more than I'd like to give it credit for. um, just because looking at the top 7 and putting 2 in your hand lets you sculpt
Oh
your hand
wow.
a little bit more, and that delve for 6 is almost not an issue because you have Mizzix who's making it cheaper, and you are already stacking your grave with a bunch of instants and sorceries
Right.
that you're
Yep.
probably not going to be using anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So Dictative Times is primo. So moving on to Expansion Explosion. So this is a card that is both I typically use as an ender if I get infinite mana. I use Explosion. I just kill everybody on the spot. Or I can use Expansion if we're having a counter war, things like that. It's definitely a really good card. It's definitely useful whenever you can generate infinite mana. I think that's kind of its most useful. Um, but it's a solid card. It's a solid include. I'm almost always having that extra island in hand that I can just pitch. So it's really nice to have that as a free counter. But if you're not wanting to draw as much and you're wanting to do more tutors, or you're upgrading it, you're going to want to replace it with a better counter spell. Frantic Search. This one is, I mean, a free draw two is pretty good. The fact that you untap up to 3 lands, you can pay just one for it if Mizzix reduces it by two. It's definitely a card that has a lot more value because of the nature of the deck.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on to Avert Invent. Typically you want to cast it for it's an invent, which is 6. Search your library for an instant card and or a sorcery card. Reveal them, put them into your hand, and shuffle. So depending on how many counters you have, experience counters you have, you could potentially cast it for 2 and get 2 cards, which is extremely valuable. And the fact that you get 2 tutors in one, you could search for a piece of interaction or one of your combo pieces and a piece of
Mm-hmm.
interaction. Miscast is another counter spell. This one I actually use the most of my counter spells because I find it the most useful. To being able to cast it for 1 and they have to pay at least 3 for it. Most people don't have that 3, depending on when you cast it.
Swan
Mystical
Song would be
Tutor,
a good upgrade.
yes, Swan Song would be a wonderful upgrade. Mystical Tutor is, I mean, probably the best card in this deck. It finds any instant or sorcery, reveal it, put it on top. So typically you want to cast it before your opponent's end step,
Mm-hmm.
so that way when it goes to your draw step, you can draw it. I mean, being able to find your Firemind's Foresight for 1 on someone else's turn,
It's
super
pretty
good.
lit, fam,
Yeah,
as the kids would say.
that's exactly what they would say. Negate. Negate is another counter. It's targets non-creatures, so it's pretty good. Reality Shift. Potentially 1 mana exile a creature is primo. I have used it against my opponent's commanders. I've used it against my opponent's win conditions. And let me tell you, the amount of salt that you get from this card, it brings me life.
So, here's a funny little thing you probably didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
You actually have completely included in your deck a non-combat based, another non-combat based, non-damage based way to win the game. So what you do is if your opponents have creatures, you can use the Narumeha loop with the Ghostly Flicker to
Mm-hmm.
make the infinite blue, and the Dualcaster Mage to
Mm-hmm.
infinitely copy the Reality Shift, manifesting their entire library.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow. I never noticed that.
So what you do is as long as there's a creature in play, you just hit that creature, and then it manifests as a 2/2. And then you just, with the copy, you just hit it again. You know what I mean? And you
Yeah,
just keep hitting the card that you keep manifesting because they're all 2/2s. So
that's
instead of milling
crazy.
them out, you exile them out.
And if they have at least 1 creature on field, you can.
Yep, you can do
Dang.
that. And there's a couple of ways, like you could do just for like a as a like a little upgrade you could do is you could put in a Forbidden Orchard if you have one. So you
Mm-hmm.
now have a land to give somebody a creature.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Stuff like that.
I never thought
Swan
about that.
Song, counter one of their spells, give them a bird, and now they've got a creature.
Yeah. Yikes. I love that.
Just saying, it's like a little. It's a little bit of a niche thing, but it is a thing that you have in here.
I didn't know that. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for educating all of us because I missed that personally. Unsubstantiate. So I've used this because it returns target spell or creature to hand. The reason I included this is because there's a lot of cards that by discarding you can do something, or I'm forgetting specifically right now, but there's essentially ways where people can get effects by discarding cards, and if you unsubstantiate it, it just goes back to their hand. They can't do anything. That's nice. Winds
Mm-hmm.
of Rebuke, it's not a counter as well. That's another good thing that I almost forgot to mention. It's not a counter. It
Yeah.
just puts it back in their hand. So they could potentially spend a bunch of mana to try and do something big, and you're like, how about no?
Yeah, it gets around uncounterability too, which is nice.
So, Winter Rebuke, again, really good blue card, kind of generically good. It returns an online permanent to the hand, to an opponent's hand, preferably. And everyone mills, so you can kind of stack your grave if you need to.
Messes with top deck tutors, like that kind of stuff.
So, moving on to enchantments, let's talk about Kasmina's transmutation. I know that in green, a lot of people use Kenrith's transformation, and this is essentially Kenrith's transformation in blue. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and has base power and toughness of 1/1. So, your opponent's scary monster or commander is now a 1/1 with no abilities.
Yeah. This actually reminds me of a card that Mikey J, shout out to, he plays in Hyper Drive By,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called Dress Down. And what Dress Down is it's, now this one's $2, so it's not quite as budget friendly as Kasmina's transformation, but it has flash, it's one blue, one colorless, and it enters the battlefield, it replaces itself by drawing a card. And then creatures just lose all abilities. So while it doesn't make them 1/1s, it just nukes all of their abilities till end of turn. So what's nice is you can play it, and then it just locks everybody out, and then you sack it at the beginning of the next end step.
Okay.
So you can kind of do this in response to like an Oracle trigger as a good example, or a Dockside or something, but it only buys you a turn. Whereas Kasmina's transformation is permanent.
Yeah.
So just something to think about.
Yeah, that's actually a good include. I might include that. Teferi's Ageless Insight. This card is probably the second best card in the deck because of the way I built it. We've mentioned a lot that there's a lot of ways to loot and draw cards and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
in this deck, and this card kind of utilizes that to its most advantage. If you would draw a card, except for the first one you draw on each of your draw strips, draw two cards instead. Being able to cast, a draw spell such as what's the one that I'm
Ponder.
thinking of? Ponder. Yeah,
Opt.
Ponder's a really good
Opt.
one.
Opt.
Ponder, opt. Being able to pay one and then draw four potentially or six, however many, and you only now you have a full hand. It's incredible. It's not always useful if you're planning on upgrading this deck to be better. Being able to just dig more and dig quickly is
Well,
extremely important with this
I mean,
build.
getting an extra card off of every cantrip. Like, if I pay, I mean, I would pay one blue to scry one and then draw two cards. Or in Ponder's case, look at the top three cards of your library and then get the best two, or shuffle it away and get two random. Like,
Mhm.
I know with Brainstorm, you draw six and then put two back.
Yeah. With frantic search, potentially with this deck, you pay one, draw four, and untap three lands. Like,
And
tell
discard
me
two
that's
cards.
not good. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is something I want to discuss a little bit later. Frantic stuff like Frantic Search.
Okay. And then we've already talked about Underworld Breach. Verity Circle kind of shuts down your opponent's dorks because anytime they tap a creature and you get to draw, like,
Yeah.
tell me that's not good.
I think the lands are pretty stock.
Yeah, pretty self-explanatory.
If you were to kind of go back and do it again, were there any changes that you would want to make?
Not a whole lot. Mainly because the deck is pretty functional and very consistent as
Okay.
is. I would definitely update it with newer cards because this build is kind of outdated.
Okay.
But like I would definitely look at some newer cards to see if there's anything that would synergize better than what I have in here. Or
So,
or like if I were to change out some of these draw spells, I would take out Teferi's Ageless Insight, things like that. I was gonna say, like, as you upgrade the deck to like 500, $1,000 budget, a lot of these cards that are in here you're gonna want to take out because you don't need so many draw spells. You don't need Teferi's Aegis Insight. You want better counter spells, interaction, things like that. So you would optimize it or streamline it more to include better interaction, to include different and better draw spells, things like that.
right. Right, exactly. So, speaking of some relatively cheap upgrades,
Hmm.
well, at least one relatively cheap upgrade um, that I did want to talk about real quick. So, you know how you had Aramancer? You have Aramancer in your build right now?
Yeah.
Well, allow me to show you a new card from. Well, it's not new, but I didn't know about it till recently. It's called Ardent Elementalist. It is 1 red, 3 colorless. It's a 2/1. And then when it enters the battlefield, you return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So the reason why I was bringing this up is because the deck produces a lot of red mana
Hmm.
and can struggle a little bit making blue from like when we were goldfishing and from what you've said earlier. Maybe swapping this out, maybe swapping out the Archaeomancer for this because it's easier, it's less color, and it's less pip intensive, even though it is the same CMC, and it also costs red. So therefore, you can use some of that excess red to pump it into there to buy back something.
Yeah.
And you also don't have to pay double colored pips. You can just pay the 1 and 3 colors.
Yeah.
So that might be worth considering. It's
Oh, I
also
already
only.
swapped it out.
Oh, nice. All right, we got an upgrade.
Yeah.
Two, there's actually a card that was revealed today from not New Capenna, but the Baldur's Gate set coming out in a couple weeks. It's
Hmm.
called Wild Magic Surge. So it's a lot like Chaos Warp, except it's red. Destroy
Hmm.
target permanent and opponent controls, so it can't be redirected to you. And then they reveal the top card of their library until they reveal a permanent that shares a type with what you've destroyed. And then they put it onto the battlefield and then put the rest of the cards in the random order. So the upside is if you blow up a land, they mill till they hit another land. If you hit an artifact, they mill till they hit another artifact. Where this isn't quite as good as Chaos Warp is,
Hmm.
let's say you hit an enchantment like a Rule of Law. Now they flip until they hit another enchantment. And in a lot of decks, that's going to be another Rule of Law. Or like if you hit a Hate Bear, it's going to flip till they hit another Hate Bear.
Hmm.
So that is kind of the downside. But the thing is, like, let's say they play Null Rod or like a Tangle Wire or a Chalice. A lot of times you'll blow those up, and then they're just going to flip into a Mana Rock. I mean, the same thing with Hate Bear decks, because a lot of times the Hate Bear decks are on Mana Dorks. So you might blow up like an Archon of Emeria or something, or Archon of Emeria, and then they might flip into a Llanowar Elf or something. But they also might flip into an Archon of Valor's Reach.
Yeah, this way.
But that's how red removal is. It's very much Wile E. Coyote.
Right.
You know what I
But I
mean?
mean, it's definitely something to think about because it's also extremely meta dependent. Because if your opponents are playing competitively, I would much rather them have a mana rock than what's that four mana value, tap to sack a creature, get a creature that's 1 mana value above that.
Birthing
I
Pod.
can't remember that. Yeah, birthing pod.
Right. Exactly. But what's nice is that this will interact with enchantments. Like I'm totally shoving this into Godo, and I'm playing this and Chaos Warp actually because it hits everything.
Yeah, that's fair.
You know, not to plug Godo. So the other thing I did want to discuss is
Hmm.
I used to play Mizzix a long time ago.
Hmm.
I built it a little bit different. The core package with the Fire's Mind Foresight and the Reiterate and the Desperate Ritual were all still there. That
Hmm.
was still a thing. But we built more of a high tide build because we were real heavy in islands. We had a lot more counter magic because we were like playing like it was more like it was like a higher power build,
Hmm.
definitely higher budget. Let's put it that way. And I tended to play like things like Snap, High Tide, Frantic Search. I played Cloud of Fairies, Reset,
Hmm.
things like that, which allowed me to net mana off of untapping lands, particularly islands. And I did play with, Steam vents and stuff like that. So, Like I could make red and blue off of them. And so I built my deck was a little more of a high tide build.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I would do to make infinite mana is I would cast reset and then copy it infinitely. So it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
That is one way to build it.
Yeah, the reason I didn't include High Tide in this build is just because building around it was a little bit more expensive than I had the budget for.
Exactly. Yeah. You're right. Well, and also the way you've got it built, it overproduces red mana and is very red centric,
Mm-hmm.
which is much more budget friendly than what I was building. I think my version was like probably $4,000. So,
Yeah.
like, you know, I don't build cheap decks.
Right. I mean, but another thing to keep in mind is like good upgrades are things like bonus round. If you want to get into a High Tide build, do that.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of really good upgrades for this type of deck that I've seen. Like Nyx's build runs bonus round. She runs
We'll drop hers in the link too.
yeah, yeah. You can definitely give it a check out because hers is vastly different than mine.
So, all right, man. Anything we want to touch on again about this? I know we're kind of we're getting a little long here.
Yeah. No, I think we've touched upon everything that we needed to. All right. If you liked what you saw, please leave a like, leave a comment down below of anything you'd like to see in the future. We do have a Patreon and a Discord if you'd like to check those out and support us. Thank you so much for having us. Bye.
Bye.